What stopped me that morning wasn't the sunrise. It was my puppy acting like a mother. Down by the little pond behind our house outside Des Moines, Iowa, my faded black and red German Shepherd puppy was sitting in the grass, sides heaving from play, ears tipped forward like he was taking attendance. Right in front of him, in a crooked little line, stood a row of ducklings staring up at him like he was their teacher. Or their whole world. Barley glanced along them one by one, counting with his eyes. When he reached the smallest, the one whose legs never seemed to keep up, he leaned forward and nudged it gently with his nose, pushing the tiny body closer in. The duckling disappeared for a second in his chest fluff, and then settled there, pressed against his warmth like it had done it 100 times before. A breeze came off the water, cooler than it looked. Barley shifted without being told, moving his whole body between the ducklings and the pond, planting himself like a wall with a heartbeat. Then he eased down, long legs folding so they could press in against his ribs and crawl over his paws. For a moment he watched the ripples, then dropped his head and rested his chin beside them, as if to say, "We stay here. We stay together." I'm Harold, 56 years old, and I've raised livestock my whole life. I've seen a lot of strange little alliances on this farm. But standing there on the bank, watching a loyal pup breathe slow so nobody on his belly lost their balance, I felt something catch in my throat. Funny, I thought. This boy barely had a childhood of his own, and he's already trying to be somebody's father. If you had seen the shape he was in when he first showed up at my gate just a month earlier, you'd never believe this was the same dog. To explain why those ducklings trust him more than the water itself, I have to take you back to that morning. A month earlier, that same morning light felt a lot colder. I stepped out toward the front gate of our place, thinking about feed deliveries and weather reports, and stopped short. Right there in the mud by the posts lay a tiny German Shepherd puppy, faded black and red under a crust of dirt, like someone had dropped a handful of ash and left it breathing. He didn't try to stand when I came closer. His eyes moved, that's all. Lips dry. Breath so shallow it barely fogged the cool air. His paws were tucked up tight, as if his body was trying to make itself smaller, less noticeable, one last time. No collar, no tag, just matted fur and a belly pulled thin from more empty days than any baby should have. I bent down and picked him up and almost cursed at how light he was, colder than he had any right to be, heart hammering too fast, like it was trying to do tomorrow's work today. I've seen enough loss on this farm to know when something's slipping away. But when he tried, just once, to push his nose into my coat, something in me said, "Not yet." Inside, Marianne saw my face, then saw him, and the part of her that once planned on vet school snapped into focus. Blankets, a warm bottle under a towel, fingers lifting his lip to check his gums, counting breaths, feeling for broken bones. She drew up water in a syringe and let it touch his tongue drop by drop, talking to him like he'd asked for this himself. We didn't dare haul him into town in that state. I called our country vet and asked him to come out, voice lower than I meant it to be. He arrived with that calm little bag he carries for everything from calves to barn cats, and worked in quiet circles around the pup. Dehydrated, starved, but no obvious fractures, no belly that screamed internal bleeding, no microchip, no mark to say he'd ever belonged to anyone at all. The vet finally straightened up and looked at us over his glasses. "There's a chance," he said. "Small, but it's there. He's been on his own a long time. You'll have to decide if you're ready to fight for him." The vet guessed a month and a half, maybe 2. Hard to tell with a body that thin. His paws looked too big for the rest of him, like he was still growing into a life that someone else already cut short. Marianne knelt beside him with that careful focus I've only seen a few times in all our years on this farm. "At this age, their bodies are still soft clay," she murmured, "but every day counts. Every hour." She fed him with a teaspoon, one slow lick at a time, then followed with water from a syringe, measuring each drop like it was worth something. We warmed towels in the dryer and wrapped him, wiped the mud from his legs and belly so gently it felt more like apology than cleaning. She worked around his eyes and muzzle with a damp cloth until the dried dirt gave way to the faint shine of fur underneath. He shivered through all of it, but he stayed. Didn't fight. Didn't quit. That night, I pulled an old chair up beside the makeshift bed we'd made from folded blankets on the living room floor. The house settled into its familiar creaks. Every now and then he let out a thin little whine in his sleep, paws twitching like he was trying to run without going anywhere. I've heard calves dream, foals too, but there was something in that sound that made me feel older than 56. By morning, the vet was back. He checked gums, temperature, listened to that tiny chest. His eyes softened just a little. Better, he said. Not out of the woods, but better. The tongue was less dry, the heartbeat not quite so frantic. I told him the truth after he left. We weren't shopping for a dog. We've got ducks, chickens, barn cats, and more bills than I like to count. This wasn't in the plan. But plans felt pretty small next to a pup who kept choosing to breathe. That evening, when the house finally went quiet, I sat there listening to the clock and my own doubts. Somewhere outside, the ducklings started their usual thin chorus by the little pen near the pond. Barley, who'd barely moved all day, lifted his head, eyes half open, and turned toward that sound like a compass finding north. Out here on the farm, the first ones to know it's morning aren't the roosters. It's the ducklings. We'd hatched a little batch that spring, a noisy golden brown parade that spent their days shuffling around the yard, stamping tiny footprints into the mud by a shallow ditch that thought it was a pond. They peeped at everything, at the sky, at the grain, at their own reflections, and now at the house where a small puppy lay learning how to stay alive. Barley still wasn't strong enough to go out, so we made him a bed by the back door where the light came in low. Every time that chorus of peeping rose up, his eyes followed it. Didn't matter how tired he was. Heads or tails, he always turned toward the sound. Marianne watched him one afternoon and shook her head, soft. Guess that's his vaccine against being alone, she said. Duck choir, twice a day. One morning I left the door cracked, just an inch or two, while I hauled feed sacks in. Didn't think much of it until the peeping got closer, sharper, like curiosity on little webbed feet. The ducklings waddled right up to the step, peering into that dark slice of doorway. Inside, Barley was rigid, not from fear, but from trying not to move. The bravest of the bunch, a little one with a crooked stripe on its head, took a few careful steps forward. Suddenly, there was only a couple of feet between them. Pup on blankets in the shadow. Duckling on the worn wooden threshold. They just looked at each other for a long moment, both of them holding their breath like any wrong move might break whatever was happening. Barley didn't growl, didn't snap. He went perfectly still, eyes soft, as if he understood he was the bigger one now, and that meant something. When the vet came by later and saw him tracking the flock through the doorway, he smiled in that tired way country vets do. He's lucky, you know. Most folks don't fuss with cases like his. That night, after I finally shooed the ducklings back to their pen and pulled the door shut, Barley circled once, folded down on his blankets, and faced the wood. Before he let his eyes close, he kept them fixed on that spot where the peeping had been, like he could still hear them through the boards. About a week later, the vet finally said the words I'd been waiting on. You can try him outside, short trips, supervised. Barley stood on his own while I opened the back door, legs a little shaky, but under him this time. The light hit him and he blinked like it was brighter than he remembered. He took one step, then another. Nose low, drawing in every smell, the way a man reads a letter he's afraid to finish. Gravel, wet earth, old straw. The faint, damp trace of the little flock that had been singing to him through walls. The ducklings saw him before he saw them. They bunched up instinctively, a yellow and brown knot, peeping louder, then quieter, not sure which felt safer. To them he must have looked huge, a new shape on old ground. Barley froze, then made his own choice. He folded down onto his belly, stretched his front legs out, and lowered his head until he was smaller than they were, and waited. One bolder duckling edged forward, step by hesitant step, until it was close enough to test him. A tiny beak nipped at the fur on his leg, then at his chest, like it was checking for danger in slow motion. Barley didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He just breathed, slow and steady, eyes soft, letting himself be inspected like this was the toll to cross some invisible bridge. That seemed to be the signal the others needed. Two more waddled up and started climbing, like little feet pattering over his side. Soon there was a whole handful of them scattered along his ribs and back, walking laps like he was a warm, lumpy island that had always been there. I leaned on the doorframe and watched this little pup, not one sudden movement in him, as if he somehow knew he was the strong one now, and that meant being gentle. By evening, we'd herded the ducklings back toward their pen. Most of them settled fast, heads tucked under wings. But the smallest stayed awake, blinking stubbornly at the dark. When I turned to go inside, I saw it slip away from the group, shuffle across the yard, and nuzzle under Barley's neck, where he lay on the step, tucking its beak into his fur like it was crawling under a living blanket. After that first day, it settled into a kind of rhythm none of us planned. In the mornings, I'd open the back door and the ducklings would spill out in a messy little wave, heading straight for the patch of yard they'd decided was theirs. Barley would trot out with them, still a bit narrow in the hips, still getting his strength back, but different now. More awake. He sniffed the air, checked their line, and then parked himself where he could see all those bobbing heads at once. On the days they stayed close, he relaxed. When one wandered off, his ears tipped, and he shifted, ready to nudge the world back into place. One chilly evening, I lost track of time, fixing a gate, and forgot to bring the flock in before the air turned sharp. By the time I remembered and walked toward the yard, the sky had gone that deep blue that makes everything look colder than it is. I didn't hear the usual chorus. For a second, my heart sank. Then I saw them. Right there in the grass, Barley was curled into as tight a ball as he could manage, tail around his nose, legs tucked under. On top of him, spread out like a blanket someone had thrown over a heater, slept every single duckling. Heads tucked, tiny chests rising and falling against his back and ribs. He was trembling, just enough for me to notice. But when I stepped closer, he didn't move, didn't shake them off, just lifted his eyes to me, dark and steady, as if to say, "Don't." They're finally warm. Later in the kitchen, I did the numbers out loud the way farmers do when they're pretending it's just math. Feed costs, medicine, another mouth. We'd talked, before he woke up proper, about finding him a good home once he was strong. Those were the words we used, like it wouldn't feel like a second abandonment to the one left behind. The ducklings, too, were supposed to be temporary. Sold on. Moved along. Marianne let me finish and then set her mug down a little harder than usual. "If we send him off now," she said, "it'll be the second time someone walks away from him. First time nearly killed him. You really want to roll those dice again?" I didn't have an answer big enough for that. So that night, when the house went quiet and sleep wouldn't come, I got up and checked the yard one more time. The ducklings were in their pen, piled together like always. Barley wasn't on his blankets in the kitchen. I found him outside, settled right up against the duck house door, nose almost touching the wood, choosing the cold over comfort now that he could have had either. It's funny how animals hear the things you don't say out loud. After that talk in the kitchen about good homes and maybe when he's stronger, Barley shifted. Not all at once, little pieces. He started leaving food in the bowl, not much, just enough to make me notice. He'd walk out with the ducklings, stand with them a while, then lie down sooner, watching instead of joining their clumsy games. His body was here. His eyes were somewhere else. The flock felt it before I did. They circled him more, peeping in different pitches like they were trying all the words they knew. One would scoot under his chest, another climb over his paw. He let them. Didn't snap, didn't move them away. He just stared past the yard, past the fence at a point I couldn't see, like he was bracing for a door to close again. When the vet came back for a check, he listened to Barley's heart, checked his gums, watched him ignore a favorite toy. Physically, he said, "He's sound, but he's spooked." Stress does that. They feel when something big might be changing. They feel you're your doubts long before you pack a bag. He told us what we already knew but hadn't put into full sentences. Routine, calm, hands on fur. If you're keeping him, keep him. If you're not, don't drag it out. He's already heard you thinking about it. Sitting there, I realized I wasn't just dragging my feet on one choice. I'd always planned to sell most of the ducklings on, same as every other year. Now I was holding a line that had Barley at one end and that little flock at the other, and pretending I didn't know it was the same rope. That evening, when the chores were done and the light went thin, I went to check the pen. Barley wasn't on the porch. He was pressed flat against the wire, nose shoved through the widest gap he could find. Inside, a half circle of ducklings crowded close, tiny beaks poking out to touch his muzzle. After the first time, it hit me clear and hard. Pull one away from the other now, and it wouldn't just be business. It would be breaking something that was finally starting to heal. The decision came looking for me in a pickup truck. That morning, my neighbor pulled into the drive, dust trailing behind him, hat pushed back like always. Months earlier, I'd told him he could have a few ducklings when they were big enough. We stood by the fence and watched the yard for a minute in that quiet way men do when they're giving each other time to change their minds. Barley was in the middle of it all, of course. He trotted alongside the little flock as they bobbed and weaved, then settled himself near the muddy patch, waiting while they drank and splashed. When the wind shifted, he got up, nosed the slowest one back toward the group, then sat again, eyes counting heads he didn't know he was counting. I cleared my throat. I know what I said, I told him, but I've changed my mind. They're busy here. Got themselves a job. He followed my gaze, took in one pup and a ring of ducklings orbiting him like planets, and let out a low laugh. Yeah, he said. I'd say they're spoken for. I'll get mine somewhere else. When his truck finally rolled away, it felt like a door shutting on a room I didn't want to go back into anyway. I went inside, found Marianne at the sink, and said it out loud so there was no walking it back. We're not sending him anywhere, and the ducks stay too. They're a package deal now. Barley didn't understand the words, but you'd swear he caught the meaning. That evening, he cleaned his bowl for the first time in days. Later, I watched him drag an old ragged toy out of the shed, nose it across the yard, and drop it right beside the spot where the ducklings liked to settle, as if he'd brought them something soft of their own. Life didn't turn magical. It just got full of small, steady things. He'd walk the flock out to the water, stand guard while they dipped and drank, and when the air cooled, he'd circle behind them, bumping the stragglers gently with his muzzle until everyone was headed home. Chores. Habits, a little working heart with feathers at his heels. The next time the vet came by, he leaned on the fence beside me and watched that strange little unit move as one. After a while, he said quietly, "Sometimes, the only thing that saves the ones who were thrown away is having someone smaller to save themselves." It snuck up on us on an ordinary afternoon. Barley came back from walking the flock in, same as always. He saw them to the water, watched them drink, nudged the usual straggler out of a thistle patch. Nothing dramatic. But when he reached the porch, instead of pausing to shake off and look for a pat, he just folded down onto the boards like somebody had let the air out of him. His breathing was a little faster than it should have been. Not panicked, just heavier. When I laid a hand on his side, the heat under my palm was wrong in that quiet way you don't like. He picked at his food that evening, then turned his head away, which for him was louder than a bark. The ducklings felt it first, like they always did. Usually, they scattered to their favorite corners of the yard once they were in for the night. This time, they bunched up around him instead, pressing in against his chest and legs, piling over his paws, tiny bodies stacked as close as they could manage. The yard went still. No fireworks, no storms, just a kind of held breath that made every small sound feel big. I called the vet again. He checked Barley over from nose to tail, thermometer, stethoscope, the whole quiet ritual. Probably just overdid it, he said. Immune system's still catching up to the life he's trying to live. We'll give him something mild, rest him a few days. He paused, hand on Barley's neck. He's not the little scrap you found at the gate anymore. Now he's got a reason to get up in the morning. Even worn out, Barley's eyes kept drifting to the pen if we carried him inside. And every time we moved him out of sight, the ducklings turned up the volume, peeping sharp and insistent until we gave in and shifted everyone under the same awning. So there we were, dog on blankets, ducks in a low box beside him, all of us crammed into a corner of the porch like some lopsided family portrait. Sometime after midnight, when his temperature finally eased a bit, I watched one stubborn duckling scramble halfway out of the box, chest heaving with effort. Barley lifted his head, saw that tiny escape attempt, and let out the softest little bark I'd ever heard from him. Just one. Enough to freeze the duckling in place. And I realized that was the first time I'd heard his voice used not to complain, but to keep his little crew together. Back then, in those first shaky days, he didn't even have a name. We just called him the little one. Barley came later, the day he stopped watching the door like it might close on him again and started watching the yard like it was his to look after. Funny how a name fits better once a dog decides to stay. A couple of weeks after that fever scare, it was like someone had finally handed him the right-sized body for the heart he'd been carrying. His step was steady. Muscle filled in where sharp bone had been. The ducklings had stretched out too, losing some of their fuzz, gaining a bit of awkward grace. Out by the pond, they lined up in the water without being told, and he took his place on the bank like it was a job he'd been hired to do. He walked the shoreline while they swam, head level with their drifting line, eyes counting the little wakes. When one drifted too far, he gave a short, sharp bark, nothing frantic, just enough to turn that tiny body back toward the middle. He moved when they moved, stopped when they stopped, adjusting his own pace to keep himself even with them, as if an invisible rope tied him to their bobbing heads. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing a sad, rescued pup when I looked at him. I just saw a dog who knew his work. Neighbors started dropping by with flimsy excuses, returning a tool, asking about feed prices, then staying at the fence to watch the show. Even the ones who liked to joke about how it's just livestock went quiet for a minute, eyes following Barley as he paced and the ducklings obeyed. All of us turned into kids watching something simple and impossible at the same time. That evening, after a long day of sun and water and small hearts doing big work, I opened the back door and whistled, expecting him to trot in for the night like always. He looked up, considered it, then turned and walked the other way, settling himself down right in front of the duck house door, curling his body along the threshold as if the day's last choice was his alone to make. Most days now look the same, and that's the nicest surprise I've had in years. 2 bowls on the mat by the back step, kibble in one, grain in the other. One for Barley, one I carry out to scatter for the flock. He doesn't dive at his dinner anymore. He walks over, waits for me to set it down, and eats in steady mouthfuls like he finally believes there'll be another meal after this one. The ducklings, well, not so little anymore, don't stampede into a panicked heap at every new sound. They still drift toward him, though, like his shadow is the place where the day makes the most sense. The vet came back for a routine check not long ago, bag swinging at his side like always. He ran hands over Barley's ribs, checked his teeth, nodded at the weight he's put on. Growing just right, he said. He flipped through his notes and smirked. Says here he's a German Shepherd, but I'm thinking about rewriting that chart. Feels like at least half duck these days. I laughed, and it felt honest. Truth is, they've done more for me than I've done for them. I used to look at animals as part of the ledger, feed in, product out, losses here and there. Somewhere between the nameless scrap at my gate and the dog lying guard by a house full of birds, something in me loosened. The tired, hard part that kept expecting the worst eased up a little every time I watched him choose to stay. In the evenings, we all end up on the porch if the weather allows. Marianne with her book she never gets through. Me with a mug I let go cold. Barley stretches out by the steps, and the ducklings settle in a soft pile around his front legs, one by one going quiet. When the last head finally tucks under a wing, he lowers his chin over them, covering the whole bundle like a lid on a pot that doesn't need to boil over anymore. There's no hours and stray, no bought and left behind. There's just this one small farm that finally feels enough. I'm telling you all this now for one simple reason. I know how easy it is these days to walk past a muddy little shape by the road and never even slow down. That puppy at my gate could have stayed nothing more than someone's tired mistake. One little bundle of bones and mud and a handful of ducklings that could have been written off as another line in the farm ledger. That's all they were on paper. But they didn't read the paper. While I stood there, counting cost and cents, they went ahead and made their own choice. They decided to be a family first and let the humans catch up later. I watched a thrown-away pup lie down in the cold so a clutch of birds wouldn't have to. I watched those same birds pin themselves around him when his body faltered, as if they knew it was their turn on duty. He started out as a heater for them, just a living blanket in a bad world. Somewhere along the way, they became the reason his eyes opened every morning, the reason his legs kept trying even when they shook. That's the part that sticks with me. Animals don't argue themselves out of kindness. They don't scroll past it. They just do the small, right thing in front of them, again and again, until it changes the shape of the day. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are, because without people willing to stand behind stories like his, most of them never get a second chapter. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility, it's pet care, it's bills and early mornings and muddy floors and the quiet, selfish gift of knowing your house is softer inside because of who wakes up there. It's deciding that a life somebody else walked away from is still worth the trouble. If you've ever driven past a shivering scrap by the road and wondered what difference you could make, this is it. You stop. You look. You hand them a chance. Or you share a story that might put that chance into someone else's hands. Every like, every comment, every share pushes one more set of eyes toward the animals that can't raise their own voices. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.